Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jack Daly, the director of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to another in the series of GE Aviation lectures. This series is the museum's longest-running program supported by a single sponsor. Since 1982, General Electric has helped the museum achieve its mission through this activity. Our sponsor is represented here tonight by Dean Gistendanner, Government Programs Executive for GE Aviation. Dean, would you stand and be recognized, please? Okay. We want to thank you for your support of this event tonight and all of the other support that you've given us over the years. Without this sponsorship, these events would not be possible, so we are deeply indebted to you for this, Dean. Thank you. Before we start the program, it's a tradition here at the museum to provide an update on major activities. In this building, two major exhibitions are in development. One is called Moving Beyond Earth, and the other is the Baron Hilton Pioneers of Flight Gallery. Moving Beyond Earth is an interactive exhibition that gives visitors a sense of being in orbit. It explores current and future possibilities for human spaceflight. The first stage of the exhibition is now open, and updates will occur throughout the rest of this year and through 2011. Pioneers will feature aircraft and artifacts that tell the stories of people who push technology or social limits of flight. Its first stage will open later this summer. At the Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center out in Chantilly, Virginia, construction of Phase 2 is on schedule to open in March of 2011. The new wing will be devoted to the care of the museum's collection. From a special viewing area, visitors will be able to watch specialists preserving aircraft and spacecraft in the Mary Baker Engen Restoration Hangar. In the meantime, you won't want to miss one of the center's most popular events called Become a Pilot Family Day and Aircraft Display. It will take place on Saturday, June the 19th. A variety of aircraft will be on display at the event, which will also include presentations and indoor activity stations for visitors of all ages. And now for tonight's program. As you just saw in Big Blue Sky, you have a good idea of who Bill Liscomb is and why he is renowned in the field of hang gliding. Born in Boston, Mr. Liscomb grew up in Cohasset, Massachusetts and Palm Beach, Florida. Even as a child, he was fascinated by airplanes. He attributes this love of flight to his father. Russell Liscomb was a B-24 co-pilot in World War II and received the Air Medal and Distinguished Flying Cross for his participation in the heroic Palesti raid. Mr. Liscomb moved to California in 1969. His interest in non-powered flight started more than 4 decades ago. He first flew a hang glider in 1971 at the first Universal Hang Gliding Championships. Actually, in his biography, it says at the notorious first Universal Hang Gliding Championship. He was present at many of the contests in the early days of this sport and was known for the innovative homemade designs that he flew. He began flying sailplanes in 1998 and earned Diamond Badge number 977 for his achievements in this sport. If you don't know what that is, you'll probably learn more about it tonight, but it requires performance demonstration of altitude and distance records. So it's a significant accomplishment. An expert in the broadest sense of the word, Mr. Liscomb has published many articles on hang gliding in aviation journals. When he isn't immersed in his passion for flight, he's a musician and songwriter. His 1999 CD titled In the Country features a number of his original compositions. Big Blue Sky is his second film. His first, Out and Return, is a short video which documents a day in the life of a sailplane pilot. It received a Platinum Award at the Houston International Film Festival. Mr. Liscomb lives in San Diego with his wife, Catherine, his son, Russell, and daughter, Megan. Now, please help me welcome Mr. Bill Liscomb.
Welcome and thank you for all for coming. It's an honor to be invited here to speak, and I wish to thank General Electric for their generous sponsorship in this series, the General Aviation Lecture Series. I'd also like to thank everyone here at the National Air and Space Museum who made this possible. There are just a lot of people, and it's a nice touch to have a green sport like hang gliding outlined on Earth Day. Peace. I'd also like to thank everyone who helped me and supported me with the making of Big Blue Sky. Again, there are just too many people to mention. The one who really stands out is my mom, Bettina Gray, who was a famous hang gliding photographer in the 70s and 80s. And since she used her maiden name, not many people realized that she was my mom. And we had quite a bit of fun of that at flying sites, so you can believe me. I'd also like to thank my sister, Bettina Bancroft, for her support in this. Sadly, both of them passed away before Big Blue Sky was finished. I'd also like to extend a huge thanks to my wife, Catherine, who is here in the audience tonight, for her support and encouragement throughout this protracted journey into filmmaking. The genesis of flight has to be the dream, the desire and passion to fly like a bird. Has anybody else here had flying dreams? Okay, I see a few here. And the initial working title for Big Blue Sky was Dreams Come True. And I started with those flying dreams where I'd walk down the street and suddenly be body flying down the street. And it's interesting to note that as soon as I started hang gliding, those body flying dreams turned into hang gliding dreams. And even today, for the past 12, 15 years, I've been flying sailplanes, and if I don't fly often enough, I'll have a flying dream, and it'll be hang gliding. So that's, it's a real intimate, physical and spiritual flight when you hang glide, and it's flight in its purest and most elemental form. And it allows mankind to fly like a bird, well, without the wing flapping problem, but it's as close as we can get. The achievement of this dream of flight is the basis for this institution and others like it worldwide. And, because foot launch flight has no place in warfare or commerce, there really hasn't been much interest in this lost frontier of flight. Naturally, I recommend you purchase and view a copy of Big Blue Sky to get the entire story and all the details of how the sport of modern hang gliding began. So, who am I and why did I do this? As Mr. Daly pointed out, I'm one of the pioneers of this sport. I started out to be an airline captain, actually. I went to San Bernardino Valley College. I was going to be an aircraft mechanic and work my way up to being a pilot and get my ratings and drive the bus, so to speak. And the second semester I was there, I got a newsletter, the subversive literature that turned out to be the first Low and Slow newsletter published by Joe Faust. And the rest, they say, is history. As I said, Big Blue Sky focuses on the beginning of the sport of hang gliding, not the beginning of hang gliders themselves, but how this became a sport in the early 70s. And, tonight I want to give you a thumbnail sketch of this hang gliding sport history and some of the anecdotes and stories that didn't make it into Big Blue Sky. So Big Blue Sky chronicles these story of these characters and their contraptions and their pursuit of this dream that they were willing to hold on to no matter what the consequences were. Their goal was to fly and to fly as close to a bird as they could. And, the sacrifices that some of them made were pretty severe. A lot of the footage in Big Blue Sky comes from a documentary that was made in the 70s by Carl Banish called Playground in the Sky. And in the 70s, I never knew Carl Banish, but it turns out that, I went to all of the hang glider meets in the first few years in California. And I got to know all the people and saw what they did and flew at these meets. And Carl Banish was also at these meets filming. And at several of these meets, we were literally 5-10 feet apart filming the same hang glider flight, and as a result of Doing Big Blue Sky, I felt like I got to know him finally. Unfortunately, he has perished in a base jumping accident. Deciding who to cover in Big Blue Sky and how to tell the story was really difficult because there are just so many people contributed in so many ways all across the country into making this a sport and advancing it along. So I boiled it down to this, aside from the history of the hang glider and the regalo wing, what really started the sport was a group of 4 people. And we'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute or two here, but I focus on these 4 people. I focus and introduce you to the first real designer of this new frontier of aviation, who is Taras Kasenik, who designed and built the Icarus hang gliders. Also in Big Blue Sky is the first national champ, Chris Wills, and the first world champion, David Kronk. And another important person from early hang gliding was the first sky god, who was Bob Wills. I chose Anthony Matthews to illustrate the fatality of the sport because he was a very talented musician and widely loved by all. He performed live at a lot of the early hang glider meets, and he also produced an album that had a lot of hang glider songs on it. And it was a real blast to see and hear these songs at all the early hang glider meets. And when he was killed hang gliding, it was just a devastating shock to everybody. It was really hard to comprehend that we'd lost someone like that to something we loved so much. One of the greatest experiences of doing this movie was getting to relive my youth. Every man's dream, well, most people anyway. And I got to hang out with all my old friends and relive old times. And almost to a person, if you asked us in the 1970s if we were a good pilot, we'd say, yeah, we were a good pilot. And now, 30, 40 years later, looking back on it, we'll admit we were good. We were good and lucky. So, where did hang gliding start? The hang glider is the proto-airplane. It's the first heavier-than-air machine that lifted man off of this planet. Pioneers like Otto Lilienthal, Octave Chanute, John J. Montgomery, and of course the Wright brothers. Now the Wright brothers, with their successful powered and controlled flight on December 17th, 1903, pretty much put the kibosh on hang gliding for a while. It shifted the focus from that to powered flight for quite a while. The first fatality of hang gliding in the United States is perhaps the first aviation fatality in this country, and it's purported to have happened in Telluride, Colorado, just before the turn of the century. That would be over 100 years ago. And I found this from a September-October issue of True West magazine, an article titled "Ghost Town 8,700 Feet Up" by E.R. Harrington. I quote, "A few years before the end of the century, 2 young Telluride citizens, after reading about the glider exploits of the Lilienthal brothers in Germany, built a glider of their own. One of them took off from a makeshift launching runway by the Tomboy mine, intending to soar out over the steep cliffs and land feather softly in the valley below. But at 12,000 feet, the air was too thin. He landed instead in the Telluride cemetery." I've spent over 40 hours trying to get a name and a date on that. So unfortunately at this time it's anecdotal, but if anybody'd like to pick up my sleuth trail, please contact me. I'll tell you where mine left off. I did find out in my research on that in 1905, the town of Telluride hired 2 brothers to bring their hot air balloon to town and fly it for the 4th of July celebration. And as the balloon ascended above Telluride, a parachutist jumped out of it, which must have been quite a spectacle in those times. As the early 20th century unfolded, there wasn't much interest in hang gliding. Everything was focused on powered flight, but there were an occasional article in magazines, like in 1909 Popular Mechanics, that would outline how to build and fly your own hang glider. And it's impossible to tell how many of these were built, how many were flown, how many were built, and then the parents intercepted any thoughts of flying before they were allowed to fly it. And there just wasn't the networking we have available today. The communications just didn't allow this to really take off. Modern hang gliding really got its true beginning in the late 1940s when Dr. Francis Regalo invented the flexible wing. Francis Regalo envisioned this flexible wing as a personal wing, a wing designed purely for sport flying, for one person, flying in its most elemental form. He worked for NACA, the predecessor to NASA at the time, and they weren't interested in this and patted him on the shoulder and sent him home. The next thing that led to hang gliding happening, was really pivotal to it, was this country making the choice to go to the moon. Now, Wernher von Braun knew about Regalo's wing and envisioned it as the perfect recovery system for these space capsules. You can fly them right to where you want them and land them. Unfortunately, the research on these wings was not done in time for NASA's deadline on these recovery systems, and instead they went with the large lift parachute. Francis Regalo never got anything for his Regalo wing design. He never was paid a penny for it. He did, however, receive a bonus, and he was pretty sore until his last days that the IRS took a big chunk of that bonus. So as NASA was researching this recovery system for their space capsules, they published pictures like this in various journals and magazines. And pictures of this Regalo wing, this flexible wing, captured the imagination of a young engineer in the Northwest named Barry Palmer. Barry Palmer saw it and immediately realized he could build a hang glider, and he flew it the first time on December 31st, 1961. And he was aware that it was the last day of the year and rushed to get it in on that year. The remarkable thing about Barry Palmer is that he just didn't do it that one day and say, hey, I did it, took 2 pictures and see you later. He kept doing it. He persisted at building these Regalo wing hang gliders for several years and built 7 or 8 iterations of his wing. Also remarkable about the Barry Palmer story is that he took pictures of it and also some movie footage. And you can see the actual footage of his first flights in Big Blue Sky. Now, another person who was interested in this Regalo wing at that time was a fellow named Richard Miller. And he got in touch with Barry Palmer through Francis Regalo. And you can see the actual letter he wrote to Barry Palmer in Big Blue Sky. And a little bit later, we'll learn a lot more about Richard Miller and his influences in modern hang gliding. So hang gliding as a sport began on May 23rd, 1971 in Newport Beach, California. And this is me and my first hang glider at that meet. It was the first formal hang gliding meet to be held in 60 or 70 years. And as I mentioned, can be considered the day this sport began. The organization of this meet was done by 4 people. Jack Lambie, who had built and designed this hang glider known as the Hang Loose. There were a couple of magazine articles published featuring the Hang Loose hang glider, and it started to generate interest in this low-speed, inexpensive way of flying. The next person involved with the organization of this first meet was Richard Miller, who had built 2 bamboo and plastic Regalo hang glider wings in the 1960s. The third person is Joe Faust, who was pretty much the messenger and produced the newsletter that I saw that got me interested in it. The fourth person was Lloyd Leitcher, who was the executive director of the Soaring Society of America at that time. And so no one person can be credited with any aspect of how the sport began. There are just too many contributors to mention. One thing I have organization of the meet in quotes in my notes, and that's because at this first meet, as is mentioned in Big Blue Sky, we were standing up on the hill in the middle of the day, and there's about 12 or 14 hang gliders and all these various foot-launched flying contraptions attempting to commit aviation all over the hillside. About 1,000 people at the foot of the hill, and a helicopter showed up, the police, and they said, "Will the organizers of this meet please report to the bottom of the hill?" And I happened to be about 20 feet away from Jack Lambie, who in a very vaudevillian manner looked around and went, "Wow, somebody organized this?" So that was kind of how hang gliding started, just really impromptu and just kind of go for it. So a little more about these first four contributors. The first one is Jack Lambie. The first time I saw Jack Lambie was at Flaybob Airport near Riverside, California. And he had built a replica of the Wright brothers glider and flyer for a PBS documentary. He used a Honda 750 motorcycle engine, and also the landing gear was from a supermarket shopping cart. So as he started his takeoff roll down the runway, it made an incredible clacking and banging and clattering sound as he shifted gears. And it's the only airplane I ever saw that shifted gears as it commenced its takeoff roll, and it was quite a spectacle. And that was Jack Lambie. He was quite a showman. I hung out for a couple of years at Flaybob Airport, and it was anything but mainstream aviation there. And it turns out that several people who hung out and had hangars at that airport ended up making gliders that they tried to fly at the first hang glider meet. The next person who organized this meet was Lloyd Leitcher, who, as I mentioned, was the executive director of the Soaring Society of America. And Lloyd had a vision of hang gliding being a farm for future sailplane pilots. You get these kids who don't have any money, they can afford this inexpensive, easy hang gliding. When they grow up and get money, they come over to soaring. And he almost got thrown out of the Soaring Society of America for that vision. But I'm here to tell you that coming up on 40 years later, he was absolutely right. A couple of years ago at Warner Springs, when I was flying sailplanes there in Southern California, 60% of the guys flying sailplanes there were my old hang glider buddies from the 70s. In the early 1970s, I was in my early 20s, and as you could see, I was a hippie, and Lloyd Leitcher was the exact opposite that. He was a very conservative, meek and mild person. And as I went to interview him for Big Blue Sky, I wondered if that had been a problem, because him interfacing with these hippies and trying to organize it. And I asked him as I interviewed him, did that cause any problems? And he said, "No, we just had work to do and we did it." That was his answer. That's the kind of guy Lloyd was, or is. And it's interesting to note that in his tenure at the Soaring Society of America as executive director, over the course of 20 years leading that organization, it grew at an average of a member per day. And he was very instrumental in getting the United States Hang Gliding Association going, first on a local level as the South Bay Soaring Association, then as the Southern California Hang Gliding Association, and finally as the United States Hang Gliding Association. And today I see Lloyd as a true humanitarian. He's humble, compassionate, and hardworking, and truly one of my heroes today. The next person who instigated this first hang gliding meet was Richard Miller. He at one time had been an editor of Soaring magazine and flew hang gliders in the late 60s with Lloyd Leitcher and Dr. Paul McCready. An interesting aside to Richard Miller, he has a connection with a very famous hang gliding designer of the 70s and 80s, Bob Trampano, who designed the Sensor Seedwing hang gliders. When Bob Trampano was a young boy, his family lived in Elmira, New York, and his dad was an avid sailplane pilot. And one of his dad's really good friends was this guy who had come over with just these amazing, just mind-bending things to talk about and think about, and it was Richard Miller. This is kind of ironic that Richard would have such an influence on young Bobby And then Bob Trampano grows up to become a really notable designer in this brand new field of aviation. This is kind of an interesting thing. Richard Miller is considered by many to be the godfather, if not the spiritual father of hang gliding. I went to interview him, and he waved me off. He said, oh, we'll get to that later. Here, let me give you a kinesiology checkup, which he did, and prescribed various herbs and vitamins for promoting my well-being. He was working as a intuitive healer at some of the local health food stores. Next thing, it was like channel surfing, hanging out with Richard. Next thing he wanted to see the radio-controlled models he requested I bring with me, and he marveled at the use of composite materials in these high-tech radio-controlled models. And suddenly, the conversation would shift to various hypothetical spiritual frontiers. You just kind of never knew where your conversation with him was going. I never did get an interview with him, and it does kind of add to his reclusive, mystical nature that I didn't. I did peel from him that right after World War II, he bought a surplus Harley-Davidson motorcycle and toured the U.S. on it. Within 6 months of interviewing him, or trying to interview him, he'd passed away, a victim of pneumonia at age 78 in his Volkswagen camper. It was listed as a homeless death, and anybody who knew him was not surprised, because a long time ago he'd given up the material for the spiritual path. And he was a dreamer's dreamer, ever considering various physical and spiritual flights. If you can find a copy of his book from 1967, Without Visible Means of Support, it's a very interesting read. And his future vision of soaring parachutes, a premonition of paragliding, if you will, is a testament to his being labeled a dreamer and a visionary. And I quote from that book: "The day will come, unquestionably, and it probably isn't too far off, when the parachutists discover that the increased maneuverability and higher than parity glide ratios of their new chutes will permit them to thermal their rudimentary gliders and set out on cross-country flights." That was from 1967. Sadly, since Big Blue Sky has been released, we have lost Richard, along with Bill Bennett and Dr. Paul McCready. The fourth person instrumental in organizing this first hang glider meet was Joe Faust. And Joe Faust was a Olympian high jumper, and in his quest to get higher, became interested in kites. And from kites, he became interested in gliders, which led him to the Soaring Society of America, an introduction to Lloyd Leitcher. And Lloyd Leitcher introduced him to Richard Miller. And Joe became the messenger. He bought a used mimeograph machine from the Soaring Society of America for $5, cleaned it up, and then started doing his Low and Slow newsletter. Dr. Paul McCready, the champion model airplane builder, champion sailplane pilot, who later went on to design the human-powered aircraft, the Gossamer Condor, which is in this building, and the Gossamer Albatross, which is in the other facility. I think I got that right. And he showed up at that first Lilienthal meet and flew Taras Kusenek's Batso, his bamboo and plastic hang glider. And Dr. McCready immediately was just captured. It just captured his imagination, the hang gliding. And I saw him one time, and I asked him if I could interview him and include him in Big Blue Sky. And his answer to me was, my education is in aeronautics. And throughout the 60s, I drifted away from it. But hang gliding got me back into aviation. And considering what he has done for aviation and the achievements he has reached, that's pretty monumental. This first hang gliding meet generated extensive press coverage. There were magazine articles worldwide, the most notable being the February 1972 National Geographic. And within just a few years, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people worldwide were flying anything, anywhere, anyhow they could. And there were hundreds of hang glider manufacturers manufacturing all types of these contraptions, some safe, some not so. Hang gliding seemed to capture the imagination of a generation, and the sport grew very rapidly worldwide. The first motto that hang gliding had was "Don't fly any higher than you care to fall," and that fell by the wayside literally within months. So I'd like to give you some random tidbits of information that may or may not have made it into Big Blue Sky. And these are things that I just kind of find interesting or uncovered while I was making the movie. And the first of these little tidbits is that in 1971, when David Kilborn was working, when he did his 1 hour soaring flight on Mission Ridge up near San Francisco on the Regalo wing hang glider, at that time he was working as an engineer and a machinist. He was working at HP building the first hard drive. One contributor worth mentioning to early hang gliding is John Dickinson. This Australian came up with the concept of using a wire-braced tubular aluminum frame for the hang glider and using a Dacron sail to cover it with. He also came up with the concept of using the triangular control bar. And his designs came to the United States in the 1960s through Bill Bennett and Bill Moyes. Today, this concept for structure and the control bar for controlling the hang gliders are used worldwide. Some of the most remarkable footage I have, in my opinion, in Big Blue Sky is the sequence about the $5 glider. And in my footage, you can see the glider pull up on an old tired Volkswagen Bug, and it's relatively close, and there's no doubt that every piece of that hang glider was from recycled materials, including the plastic sail, maybe not the tape. The first shot of him flying, he takes off and kind of goes across the hill and lands. The second flight takes off, does a soaring turn, and lands higher up the hill than where he took off. And the third flight this guy had on his homemade hang glider is what you see in Big Blue Sky, where he takes off, does multiple soaring turns, and lands on top of the hill. And to me, that just illustrates how available hang gliding was to people and what you could do with, for nothing if you knew what you were doing. So, anywhere, anybody, anytime, anything could fly. So while we're talking about this glider from recycled materials, I have a few pictures here of first generation hang gliders, circa 1971. This is my first hang glider, which is Jack Lambie's Hang Loose. And it broke the first time we flew it. You hang on to these bamboo poles, and they just broke out the front of the glider. We didn't have cordless power tools. We had a hammer, a screwdriver, 2x4 nails, and baling wire. So we'd split a 2x4 with a hammer and a screwdriver, nailed it to the leading edge, and then wrapped it with wire, and then taped the covering back on it. So that was a field repair circa 1971, hang gliding. The FAA certainly would not have approved of that in any way, shape, or form. Next is a bamboo Batso hang glider, and this is me in the cockpit, and you can see it's made from liberated bamboo. You just drive around, find a dead stand, and jump out with your hacksaw and cut it. At the joints here where everything came together, you drill a hole, run some baling wire through it, tie it up good with the wire, then wrap some strapping tape around it, and you were good to go. We found multicolored duct tape, and put some foam on the hang tubes. And even with that, at the end of a good day of hang gliding, you'd have huge black and blue bruises in your armpits. It was a sign of a good day of flying. This is at Torrance Beach on October 5th, 1971. This is yours truly over here. And these are the guys that I built and flew hang gliders with. And we were there to fly our lightest pilot all the way to the beach. You can see where the surf line was. We were going to fly him all the way there just to let everybody know how good we were. And within an hour, Taras Kosenek soared for over 5 minutes in his Icarus. And George French, the pilot of this glider, is here in the audience somewhere tonight. George? There he is, right dead center there. He lived to tell it all. It's really good to see you. The Lockheed Skunk Works, the infamous design bureau that designed the U-2 and the SR-71 spy planes, had a hang gliding connection. Volmer Jensen, who had built several home-built airplanes, got interested in building a fixed-wing hang glider as this movement started to gather momentum. And he enlisted the help of one of his friends, Irv Culver, to help him with the airfoil design and work on the glider. And Irv Culver was a employee of the Skunk Works. I got to meet Ed Heinemann, the designer, the famous designer for Douglas aircraft. And he designed the Dauntless dive bomber and most famously the A-4 Skyhawk, also known as Heinemann's hot rod. I got to go and sit down and chat with him in his final years, and the last time I met with him, I was accompanied by fellow hang glider pilot and designer Tom Pagini. We sat there for hours just learning more and more about jet fighters, and he was totally hang gliding captured his imagination. He was in his early 80s and had suffered a stroke, and he walked us to the door. And just as we got to the door, he kind of choked up and said, "You know what, guys? If I was younger, I'd be right out there with you." You know, and that just kind of blew my mind that he would be so interested in hang gliding. There were a handful of hang glider pilots in the mid-70s as these gliders became, faster and stronger, and we started flying higher and farther. There were a handful of hang glider pilots who kind of rose to the top of the crop and whose piloting skills, in my humble opinion, rival that of Chuck Yeager, Scott Crossfield, and Bob Hoover. Hang glider pilots like Roy Haggard and Tom Pagini, Bob Wills, would design their hang gliders, do little bunny hops on a training hill, take off a medium-sized hill, and finally launch these wings they designed off of a mountain to explore their stability, strength, and control. And these were hang gliders that were more like art. They weren't designed by a warehouse full of engineers. They weren't tested in a wind tunnel. And many times these pilots did not have a reserve parachute to help them in severe moments. But, these guys repeatedly demonstrated their mastery of controlling these sometimes unstable wings, often with uncanny precision. By the mid-1970s, flying hang gliders in mountains had become popular, and it afforded the hang glider pilots a wilderness experience. It gave us an appreciation of nature. It introduced us to micrometeorology, and we were all interested in bird flight. Hang gliding allowed mankind to literally fly with the birds. You can talk to each other when you're flying hang gliders. You pull up next to your buddy, you can communicate, you can talk with people on the ground. It's a very intimate and unique form of flying. When we're on an airliner, it's like riding in a bus. Well, maybe not that nice sometimes, but riding in a car is like flying in a Cessna. And flying a hang glider is like riding your bicycle. You're out in the environment, and it's a really intimate experience. You really feel a part of the environment you're in. There were definitely golden years of hang gliding, and this would be probably 1974 through 1977. And, in those times, it was just incredible. As Donita Hall says in Big Blue Sky, every weekend you'd go out to go flying, and there'd be news of somebody flying farther, higher, faster. There'd be an incredible new hang glider design that you'd see and just, lose your mind over. And there was also sad news, those news of fatalities. I recently reread famous aviation author's classic tale of the fledgling airline industry, Fate is the Hunter. And there was a real parallel there between early hang gliding and the early airline industry. The Fate is the Hunter is punctuated by him telling about another crew that went in, they got iced up and crashed, they slammed into the side of a mountain or disappeared on a transoceanic route. And it's very similar to hang gliding, where we made these mistakes, we learned from them, and we've gone on to being pretty safe. as safe as flying can be. Similar to the rise of general aviation in the 1920s, popularity of hang gliding increased, and there were no design criteria or flight training when it first started. And there were quite a few fatalities for a couple of years. There's no way the Federal Aviation could have regulated hang gliding, and it is a stroke of genius that it was allowed to be self-regulating. And that has worked out extremely well for all parties involved. No, after the Soaring Society of America voted no on adopting hang gliding was not picked up or incorporated in any other mainstream form of aviation, so they started their own. And they've done really well at that. The only statistics I've ever seen were from Flying Magazine in 1988. And flying fatalities are expressed in fatalities per 100,000 hours of airtime. And in this article, they showed general aviation at 2.4 fatalities per 100,000 and hang gliding at 1.7. And I think that's largely in part due to the fact that when we fly hang gliders, we're flying certified aircraft at a regulated flying site in pretty safe conditions. Paramount, most important thing is we're flying with a reserve parachute on our chest. And believe me, I feel really vulnerable when I get in any kind of airplane without a parachute as a result of all my years of hang gliding with one. In the mid-70s, the way this society viewed, the United States society viewed hang gliding was, we were lunatic fringe, suicidal tendencies, death wish. In 1976, I went to Germany and flew in Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. And there, I couldn't buy beer at the beer garden. You are an American, we will buy your beer and you will sit with us. At the flying site, there were offers to carry my glider up for me. At takeoff, there would be a nuclear physicist next to me and a 747 captain for Lufthansa behind me. And, I was treated with respect and everything. And then back home to being lunatic fringe. It was kind of a letdown. So by the late 1970s, Dr. Paul McCready enlisted Jack Lambie, Taras Kusenek, and a few other people who had been involved in the birth of the sport of hang gliding to help him work on the Gossamer Condor and Albatross. Excuse me. And as the years have gone by, there was a good pool of very talented hang glider designers in Southern California. Not all of them were there, don't get me wrong. But as the decades have rolled by, most of them have ended up either working at Dr. Paul McCready's AeroVironments or Roy Haggard's similar company, Vertigo. So that brings us to today. How many people here know about paragliding, have seen one or flown in one? Okay, it's not just me, good. Well, paragliding in some parts of the world and this country has become far more popular than hang gliding. And as a hardcore, grassroots pioneer of hang gliding, I was kind of put off by this initially, but as I've taken a few paraglider flights and learned more about it and gone flying with them, and it embodies everything that early hang gliding did. It's inexpensive, it's accessible, it's cheap, it's easy to initially learn how to fly. Today, the average age of a hang glider pilot in the U.S. is close to 50 years old. So what has hang gliding done for you and me? What has hang gliding given society? What has it given aviation? Well, let's not forget it got Dr. Paul McCready back into aviation. Aside from that, the most notable thing to come out of hang gliding is the reserve parachute. Initially, this was a parachute that's held in a container on your chest, on your harness, about the size of a medium-sized phone book, and you deploy it with your hand, and as it opens, it brings you and the hang glider down safely and slowly. As the years went by, they started to adapt these to ultralights and came up with ballistically launched parachutes, which today have become the ballistic recovery systems for general aviation. You can buy them on a production aircraft today. and that can be traced directly back to hang gliding. By 1993, hang gliders were becoming far more dynamic than they were when parachutes were first developed for them. And you know, when they get into trouble, there was more mass and they were going faster, so they need to revise the recovery system. So Betty Pfeiffer contacted Bill Gargano to design a revolutionary type of reserve canopy. And this is called the Quantum, and it's unique in that it uses lift to pull itself open. This parachute was modified to use for skydiving, for jumping out of an airplane, and the smoke jumpers in Missoula, Montana quickly adopted it, and they really liked it because it does my two favorite things about a parachute. It opens quickly and brings you down slowly. So it didn't take long for the U.S. Army Special Forces to find out about this chute, and more than 3,000 of them are in use today, and that again started with hang gliding. The flying wing type of aircraft is an aircraft with no tail. And this unusual tailless planform has been used throughout aviation history with not always satisfactory results. It's safe to say today that the flying wing has found a home in hang gliding. The pendular stability, the weight of the pilot below the wing, helps to overcome some of the problems inherent to that type of design. And it is perfect for hang gliding because they're light, they're portable, and the performance is rather good. The basic regalo wing that Francis Regalo designed and that was first adopted for hang gliding has evolved into what we call today blade wings. And these high performance blade wings, the evolution has been a slow but gradual thing. So this is me at Elsinore, California in 1973. My harness is a child's swing seat that's been modified. There's no helmet, okay? You can see the sail is very flappy and the structure is pretty minimal. And this is what guys are swooping around in today. Today's flexible wing hang gliders are sophisticated aircraft, and the top of the line gliders feature double surface sails that are cut with computer controlled digital sail cutting machines. They feature cantilevered carbon fiber airframes. And what that means is they can get rid of the rigging on top of the glider and reduce the drag and get better performance. They have variable geometry, which means they have a mechanism that allows the nose of the glider to open and close. They can open it up for more performance and close it slightly for better handling and easier takeoff and landing. And all the while this variable geometry is going on, they have internal compensated pitch stability devices. That's my technical sentence for tonight. They also have streamlined aluminum tubing control bars to further reduce drag, along with streamlined harnesses and helmets. Unlike other types of aircraft, there are no systems. There are no control systems, electrical, hydraulic, fuel, or pneumatic systems. These are simple, robust, reliable, and honest aircraft. A well-trimmed hang glider is as pleasant to fly as any aircraft, a true joy in the air. In 1974, this was a state-of-the-art fixed-wing hang glider. This was me at the 1974 Nationals in a Quicksilver B. Another contemporary fixed-wing design of that time was Paris Cosenic's Icarus V, which was light years ahead of the standard regalos a lot of people flew. Contemporary fixed-wing hang gliders are made almost entirely of composite materials. They weigh 85 pounds and up and perform as well, if not better, than some vintage sailplanes. Fixed-wing hang gliders of today, such as this, get a glide ratio of 18:1, meaning if they are 1 mile high, they can glide 18 miles. And this performance is pretty remarkable considering you run off a hill with it. To see what you can do with a modern hang glider, go on to YouTube or Google and look up Johnny Durand, John Heine, or Jeff O'Brien, and prepare to be amazed with spectacular footage of aerobatics and scenery. It's just remarkable what people are doing with hang gliders nowadays. I hope you've enjoyed my brief recap of the history of the sport of hang gliding and some of the stories behind making Big Blue Sky. And the stories that didn't make it into the movie. Next year will mark the 40th anniversary of this sport. Many of the pilots who flew in the mid-70s are still flying hang gliders or have moved on to other aircraft. And during the 70s, a lot of kids, preteens and teens and people in their early 20s started off with hang gliding and went on to careers with NASA, commercial aviation, and other forms of aviation. I started flying hang gliders again about a year ago, and I'm constantly running into people and friends I flew with in the 70s, and they're still flying too. I've flown general aviation aircraft and sailplanes. And when you fly these kind of airplanes, there's a lot of procedures. Like before you land, you have to be at a certain location, at a certain heading, a certain altitude and a certain airspeed, and then you continue with this entire procedure. It's all set out by numbers and dials and instruments. And coming back into hang gliding, I'm reminded that hang gliding is a very intuitive form of flying. We have no instruments. It's done by feel. There's no instruments required. You can fly like a bird. And it's done by feel and thought, just like in a dream. As in Big Blue Sky, I'd like to remember and honor all the people who laid their lives on the line and lost pursuing this dream. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We have some time for questions and questions. We have a question way in the back. Yes?
Where'd you go to high school?
The question is, where did I go to high school? I went to high school in Cohasset, Massachusetts, and Brunswick, Maine.
How'd you end up at Valley College and flying at Flaybob?
How did I end up in California at San Bernardino Valley College and flying at Flaybob? I got tired of digging my Volkswagen Bug out of that lump of snow. Yes. Could you say that again, please? Where exactly was that first meet held in Newport Beach, California? Today it is a housing development, unfortunately. But someone has had the insight to go back there and find the spot and put a plaque in the ground. So somewhere on a street within a mile or two of downtown, there's a plaque in a neighborhood there. Yes.
What kind of glider are you flying currently, and where are you flying?
What kind of glider am I flying currently, and where am I flying? I have two gliders. I have this ATOS. This is me flying it last summer. And a couple of weeks ago, I got a Northwings Freedom 170. They're both kind of at opposite ends of the performance spectrum. And I fly them regularly at Torrey Pines, California. Yes? Close calls regarding accidents.
We don't have time for...
Yeah, we don't. Well, I'll run down my canned answers. From flying hang gliders for 30 years at Torrey Pines, those are the questions. You've ever been hurt? I'll run by the whole gamut of them. You ever been hurt hang gliding? And my common answer is, well, last week I only got killed twice. The next question is, are you a hang glider? And the response is, no, I'm a hang glider pilot. This is a hang glider. What time are you going to jump? Well, we don't actually jump, sir. We hook our harness into the glider and then we run off the cliff. And I'll do that as soon as my hat is full of $20 bills. So, to seriously answer your question, I sprained my knee a couple of times and my ankle a couple of times and some stitches. And I've been very lucky, very careful and cautious. Question, have I deployed my reserve? No, I have not. I've throughout my hang gliding career, I like to be tail end Charlie. You know, if we pull up to a new site with a new glider, I'll watch 5 other guys do it. And if they do it successfully for a few months, I'll start considering it. Yes.
At what altitude do you have to start getting concerned about FAA filings and things like this? If you get up there about 8 or 10,000 feet, it might take a while.
Okay, the question is, at what altitude do I have to start worrying about airspace and the FAA? And the answer is, it depends on where you're flying. It's my responsibility to look at a sectional chart and figure out where the restricted airspace is and stay out of it. And the top of that is 18,000. Well, 17,999.99.
Not oxygen mask, that's academic.
Yes. Yes, in the back there?
Yes, you mentioned that you would fly radio-controlled aircraft as well, and dynamic soaring is one of the things they're doing with radio-controlled aircraft. Do you see that being possible with hang gliders or microlights?
All right, the question is, I fly radio-controlled aircraft, and they are capable of dynamic soaring with radio-controlled airplanes. And do I see hang gliders or ultralights doing that? And I guess my opinion would be not yet. I'm trying to get our sponsors, GE, interested in developing a glider that might withstand those Gs and sustain those flying speeds. But at this time, I don't think our gliders are dynamic enough to do it. And then the next question, of course, is, would I be able to stay conscious during those severe maneuvers? I don't know. Time will tell. You know, somebody will do it, no doubt. Yes.
Where is the best place to learn, and where is the best place on the East Coast to learn?
Oh boy, where is the best place to learn, and where is the best place on the East Coast to learn? I believe there's a place in Ridgely, Virginia. Maryland, thank you. Those California, Nevada, Virginia, Maryland, whatever. But there are a lot of places here on the East Coast and nearby, and I'm sure if you look on the internet, yeah, there are people here who have flyers that can help you out with that.
Quick question.
Yes.
What do you, talk to some of the old, the guys you used to fly with, what do you think the future of hang gliding is?
What do I think the future of hang gliding is? Well, it certainly isn't as popular as it was in the 70s. You know, as I said, I think it really captured the imagination of that era. You know, that was 4 years after the Summer of Love, dude. You know, and I don't think people are just driven to do that today. You know, they're, as we were discussing at dinner, you know, they have couch sync. You know, they're stuck on their internet and then just don't get out and do things like this as much as they used to. And it also may have something to do with how our society perceives this. You know, as I said, it's always kind of been a negative, you know, connotation with hang gliding. So I don't know. I think it'll continue. And as a matter of fact, there's a big mixed group of people at Torrey Pines who are bilingual. They fly both paragliders and hang gliders. And we're getting a group of paraglider guys together to go up to LA and transition over to hang gliding. So yeah, I think it'll be around, you know. Yes.
Anyone will be able to get cross country by means of paragliding or hang gliding?
Question, will we be able to do cross countries from paragliding
Hang gliding.
and hang gliding? Yeah, they do it regularly. I think the world record right now for a hang gliding cross country flight, and I'm not making this up, is over 400 miles. It's somewhere around 430 miles, where they basically ride a weather system. Just stay in front of the weather and use it to push them along. And paragliders, I'm really not sure what the distance record is, but I'm sure I'd be amazed if I knew. Pardon?
260, 280 miles.
Okay. Okay, great. Great. Questions? Yes.
I was wondering if in the 70s you were aware at all of the group in the UK called the Dangerous Sports Club. They ended up inventing bungee jumping.
Oh,
I know some of them were into hang gliding stuff.
the question is, was I aware of a group in the UK called the Dangerous Sport Club who came up with bungee jumping? I'd never heard of them. Never heard of them. You know, there were quite a few hang gliding pioneers in the UK. And I mentioned Carl Banish, who did the movie Playground in the Sky. He was actually the person who invented base jumping. And that's how he perished, unfortunately, in Norway. Yes?
You seem to be more welcomed by the European crowd at the beginning. Would you say that the Europeans had a greater tolerance or appreciation for risk, and how does that compare to this country today?
How does the Europeans' greater appreciation of risk compare to today and in this country? I think it's a cultural thing. You know, they just accept things like that a lot more. There's a lot more soaring clubs for sailplane flying in Germany than there are in the U.S. It's a real social thing. They'll have large clubs that own a lot of really good gliders, and everybody shows up and everybody flies, and it's really popular. And we just don't have that. You know, the U.S. is kind of the me country, so everybody has their own sailplane, and you know, the club thing isn't quite as big, I think. Were my folks very supportive of me doing this? Well, as I mentioned, my mom became one of the world's most famous hang gliding photographers in the 70s and 80s, with hundreds of covers and pictures and articles and stuff. And the picture of me flying the hang loose glider at the first meet is one of her first hang gliding shots. She shot that with a little Instamatic camera, and she didn't take any more hang gliding pictures for a couple of years. My sister gave her a camera for Christmas around 73, and that was when she really started taking it. And she really supported it. She was really proud of it, you know, and showed up at a lot of the early meets. And I got into hang gliding professionally and started, you know, flying for companies and doing test flying and building them and stuff. And about the time I burned out on it and left it for a little bit, she'd, you know, risen in her involvement in it. She was always supportive of it. And my dad was intrigued with it. You know, he was as mentioned, was a B-24 co-pilot in World War II. And I think one of the neatest things I got from flying hang gliders was getting to speak aviation with my dad. And he came out and saw me fly. He never wanted to, but he sure watched it and was interested in it. And my mom never had any real interest in hang gliding. One year I got Will's Wing to make her a special harness with her name embroidered on it, and she opened it up and turned white as a sheet, and we never saw it again. So, yes.
The film of Big Blue Sky, we saw an hour's worth. Is that the extended film, or is there more to it?
The question is the 50 minutes the extent of Big Blue Sky, the movie? And the answer is the movie runs 78 minutes. And because of time constraints using this theater, I selected 50 minutes of it. So it kind of omits the historical hang gliding and the story of Francis Regalo and the epilogue. Mm-hmm. Yes. Does my wife fly? She did in 1972. She flew one of my hang gliders. It was made out of irrigation aluminum tubing, and technically it was a cylindrical wing regalo with truncated tips. Unfortunately, it was a very low aspect ratio, so it wasn't a very wide wingspan. It was kind of a stubby thing, and she managed to thump it into the ground pretty darn good. Proud of her. Yes.
Yeah, I started flying in '74, and a couple nights ago was looking at some video that we shot at the Liscomb back in those days, film, of course. And there was a feeling in the sport back then. It was young, it was vibrant, and is there any way we can recapture that? Is paragliding the way that that's going to happen again? Or?
Yeah, the question is, will we ever recapture the energy and the feeling of hang gliding in those early years? Could we do it with paragliding today? And you know, I think it was just a product of the time. You know, it really was an exciting thing, you know, when it was pure adrenaline. It was the first extreme sport. We were doing things nobody had ever done before, doing things people hadn't even imagined doing. and doing it successfully. And I don't know. I don't think so. You know, it's kind of, everything's pretty blasé, you know, unless you're doing a triple backflip on your ATV over 40 buses, you know, who cares? Everybody's kind of blasé about things, you know. Yes. The question is, do I have any interviews in the movie with Dr. Francis Regalo? And although Kay and I visited him in 1972 and found him to be the most charming, polite, exceptional human I've ever met. And every time I met him, he remembered who I was and was very gracious and welcoming. And by the time I'd gotten around to doing Big Blue Sky, I started in 2003. And I walked out of my office one day and had an epiphany. And it was like hitting a gong. I just resonated with make the movie, tell the story. And by the time I got down to Kitty Hawk to interview Francis Regalo, unfortunately, he was pretty old and suffering from a little bit of dementia, and was unfortunately not able to really be interviewed at that time. He really wanted to be, and he really tried, but he just couldn't remember. And his longtime good friend and just a practically family member, John Harris, was very kind and gracious and took the time out of his extremely busy schedule to sit down with me and to tell me the Francis Regalo story, which truly is remarkable. I mean, what a guy, what a vision he had. More questions?
Did you ever get to fly in Yosemite?
The question is, did I ever get to fly Yosemite? The answer is no. Not yet. It's on the list.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have tonight, Bill, and we thank you very much for bringing this story to us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And perhaps based upon some of the questions you've had tonight, you may have re-stimulated the interest in this field, and maybe we'll see some things come out of it. It wouldn't be the first time that it's happened after a presentation here. So,
Good.
but thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.
It's been a wonderful evening. We want to thank General Electric once again for the sponsorship of this opportunity. Bill will be available out in Milestones of Flight afterwards for a few minutes if you would like autographs. And we ask that you leave via the rear doors in the theater. But thank you very much for supporting our program. It's great to see you here tonight. Thank you.